Thank you, Bastien. First, I'd like to thank Bastien Dupont for this opportunity and also the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resilience. So as he told, I'm going to mostly present my work about multisectoral impacts of global warming. So today I'm just going to quickly present myself, very shortly, I promise. And then I'm going to present two main results we obtained. First, a regional study about the livestock exposure to multiple stressors in West Africa. And secondly, a broader global scale analysis of multiple risks and also benefits, I'll come back to that, of the global warming and how they will emerge and how we have shown that they will all have emerged before 2050. So really quickly, I finished my master's degree in 2015 about climate-environment interactions at the University of Paris-Saclay. In 2020, I completed my PhD, which was a perfect year to complete a PhD, about the evolution of temperature and heat stress extremes during the 21st century. The aim in this PhD, what we aimed for was to conduct climate analysis, but focusing on specific indicators to possibly bring insights on the possible human perception. For example, we focused on the heat stress on population, which is the combined effect of elevated temperature and humidity on the human body. We focused on extremes. We also focused on the velocity of the change in terms with a moving baseline, etc., etc. And since 2020, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the French Institute for Sustainable Development, so IRD in France, and mostly I analyze multisectoral impacts, so covering a large amount, many different sectors possibly affected by climate and its changes, so heat extremes, agriculture, hydrology. So while I mostly focus on West Africa and East Africa, but our methods, the data we analyze, most of them can be applied at global scales, so to different regions in the world. So first part of my presentation, I'm going to present you what has been published at the beginning of the year about the livestock exposure to future accumulated climate-related stressors in West Africa. Just to start with a bit of context, there is a global warming. It's observed for almost 200 years now. And according to climate models, according to different projects, it is projected to intensify in the future. In this context, and according to these projections, climate change could increase by 8 to 80 million the number of people at risk of hunger before 2050 at global scale, but of course different regions might be differently affected, so mostly Africa and Southeastern Asia, which according to the previous paper, according to the literature, should be the worst affected regions in the world. In the context of livestock systems, which are main source of food production and income in low-income countries, so which is the case in many countries in West Africa, so Niger, Burkina Faso, Senegal, etc., etc. Many studies, for example, one of 2019, show that this sector, livestock systems, will be consequently, of course, adversely affected. And a more recent study show for West Africa that only considering the heat stress, so still the effect of humidity combined to temperature, but this time on animals, so this time on different organisms, only considering these impacts, this risk intensification could strongly affect the livestock and result in large production decrease. So the example in this paper is for cattle and the dairy production, and it shows significantly decrease. I don't recall the numbers specifically, but that's this context that inspired our work. And what we wanted to do is to investigate how livestock could be exposed to accumulated, so not only heat stress extremes, but also other sectoral impacts, possible sectoral impacts, and specifically risks. I'll go back to that in West Africa. So our approach is to answer to two major questions. First, how multiple and multi-sectoral, cross-sectoral risks, stressors, whatever the word, but we understand the adverse change of that, behind that, could accumulate according to climate models and future projections, and how livestock could be exposed to such cumulative possible risks in the future. So if you are really interested in the details of the work, once again, I can send you the publication later. So I'm not going to go too much in detail here, but I'd be glad to discuss with you later about the methodology and, more importantly, the data we use. We use the data, the world variables, from which we calculated different indicators from the intersectoral impact model intercomparison project, which is called ISIMI. So typically, this is a global, the international effort to provide a multimodal assessment. So with as well as uncertainties quantification possibilities, and also robustness quantification possibility to provide a very large range of sectoral simulations, both at historical scale and also in the future. So you have combined simulation, climate model simulation, that then are taking as input for impact simulation. So for example, runoff simulation, vegetation simulations, crop yield simulation, etc., etc. So that's what we use. We chose to focus only on 8 climate indicators. I don't go to the selection here, I don't have the time, but we focus on eight climate-related indicators. So some rainfall indicators, heavy rain days, maximum consecutive dry days. This is the temperature humidity index, is the heat stress index that illustrates the heat stress on livestock, on animals. We focus also on extreme runoff flow, very extreme high, extreme low runoff flow, and also what is called the leaf area index. For those who are not aware of that, it can provide an information of the density of vegetation on ground, so possibly what can be breeded by animals, by cattle, for example. So eventually an information of amount of food available for breeding. We focus on only, so this is the models. Once again, we can discuss it. I don't want to bother with these details, but yeah, we would be glad to discuss about it. We focus on one specific greenhouse future scenario, which is the highest, which is the highest emissive scenario in this specific phase of ISIMI, because there is now a new one which is built, but at this time we focused on this one. A few results, not results, but I wanted to put some context for a few indicators. I won't going to present all of the 8 indicators each time, but I found it really relevant to show at least a few of them. So just to have an idea, currently, according to the simulation, what are the historical values of each indicator before talking about future possible changes? So here you have the maximum consecutive dry days per year. What we can see is that at the top of the region of West Africa, we have more than 270, the maximum consecutive dry days is almost all the year, which is of course consistent with the fact that most of the region is desert. In the south, the maximum consecutive dry days is 60 days, so 2 months, which is the maximum you can have without any rain, even a slight rain. When we look in terms of annual extreme runoff, we have patchy location. In the south, we have particularly high extreme runoff. So extreme runoff here is the maximum, we average every daily, we calculate the 7 days mean running for all the year, and we take the maximum of this value and investigate each change year to year. So this is a historical value in West Africa. So once again, we have this dipole north and south. And for other index, for example, this is the number of what is considered in literature as severe, number of days of severe heat stress. So historically, so from 1979 to 2005, there is no or very, very few days with severe heat stress in this region. So once again, this particular index and severe being a value equal or above this one, this threshold. And for leaf area index or vegetation proxy, we can see that in the south part of West Africa and what is can be considered at the beginning of Central Africa, we have high value, whereas in the north, it's not the case. Now, considering the projected changes, so the future changes between this period and this period, so 2005 to and the future period 2074 to, I'm really bad at dates, sorry, but this future period, right? This is the projected change. The dotted area indicate when models, multi-models, multi-simulation agree on the sign of the change, which is not always the case. So what is the most important things to see is that we, in this region, we find consistent with literature, dipole between west and east changes. In the west part of the region, what we mostly see in the climate future projections is that it's drying. The trend is that it dries for, we can see it in maximum consecutive dry days, of course, but in also high annual extreme runoff. So it's really wettening in the east part of the region of West Africa. The value are in relative, so it means that if you have a plus, if you have a value of 1%, if you have a plus 100%, it means that the historical value are doubling, and if you have minus, the oppositely results. For severe heat stress, as I have shown just before that, there is no historical severe heat stress days, but according to the future and according to future simulation in this specific scenario, we can see a large increase of severe heat stress days. For example, in Chad, so the eastern part of West Africa, we can see an increase of more than 80 days, so 3 months more with severe heat stress days for livestock. Although currently there is no such thing for mean annual leaf area index, kind of consistently with precipitation hydrological changes, we have an increase of the vegetation along the side on the eastern part of West Africa and a slight decrease on the western part of West Africa. So this is for proper changes in each indicator. And as I told you, I mostly focus on cumulative changes. So what we did was to consider for each of the 8 indicators, we have considered that given this indicator and a corresponding sign of the change, we consider a risk. For example, for the leaf area index, if we have an increase of this indicator, we consider that it's not a risk, it's better, you have more vegetation available. But if you have a decrease, you have a risk. So what we did was to calculate for each indicator a simple spatial matrix with one when we have a risk, significant risk, so both an adverse change in terms of sign and also larger than the historical standardization to have a significant future change. You put a 1 when you have that, a 0 if you have neither a risk or it's not significant. And then we sum up all these spatial distributions to obtain a spatial distribution of cumulative possible risks. So that's the kind of matrix spatial distribution we obtain, cumulative multi-stressors, multi-risk. So I just put you back how we proceeded at the top of the slide. What we can see is that there is a large pattern covering eastern Mali, Niger, most part of the Niger, and central Chad. So the eastern part, once again, that is characterized by at least 5 to 6 cumulative multiple indicators compared to other regions. Most of the regions, so you have also patchy patterns with as much as 5 to 6 cumulative risks. Most of the other places are mostly characterized by only 3 to, let's say, 4 projected cumulative and multi-sectoral risks, which is mostly explained by heat stress intensification when we look in details in each of these 8 indicators changes, which I don't have the time to go into deeper. As I told you, we are focused. What we wanted was to characterize this cumulative multi-risk possible patterns and changes in the future, but combining it with data or with results about the livestock exposure. So what we did was to find, there is published in 2018 gridded data of livestock, so at a global scale. So it's a fixed, you don't have, this is one of the limitations of the study actually, you don't have the dynamic evolution, the timing evolution of the population, but at least you have an idea of the current spatial distribution of animals. So this gridded data set provide data for 8 different species. And for this particular region, there is 4 major species, so cattle, chicken, goats, and sheep, which are mostly elevated, raised husbandry. Animal husbandry in this region mostly cover these 4 major species. So what we did was to compare these spatial distributions. So first here I represent you, so the same matrix that I explained earlier, and in white per species, so for these 4 major species, cattle, chickens, goats, and sheep, the spatial distribution of the numbers, the spatial distributions per species of places where you have at least 1,000 beasts of each animal, each species, once again. We also did the same at country scale. I don't have the time to explain that. Once again, it's in the paper, but we did the same. This is only for the region, but we also investigate per indicator, per country, per species, this exposure. But I don't have I don't have the time to go into details today. What we can what we can remember for this result is that for a specific location that I'm illustrating with a black box here, you have both a special pattern of high number of cumulated risks, multisectoral risks, and also it corresponds to a location where you have a loss of animal husbandry for the 4 species here. So what we show is that a total of almost 8 million animals, considering once again that we have a fixed number of livestock, which will change, this is obvious. But under this hypothesis, at least 8 or 7 and almost 8 million of animals should be exposed to at least 5 to 6 projected multisectoral risks, according to climate and impacts models. So more in detail, these numbers include almost 40% of cattle and at least 1/3 and more for goats, sheep, and chicken. So few take-home messages for this study. So according to climate models, a large part, so not all of the region, but a large part of West Africa could be affected to 5 to 6 cumulative models. Very few spots also show accumulation of 7 multisectoral risks. That's important. In terms of livestock exposure, 1/3 at least of the 4, for all of the 4 major animal species should be exposed to these cumulative multisectoral risks. So I'll put you the numbers, range of affected relative again. And what I didn't have the time, but what we also quickly explored in the paper, it's the kind of the timing of which indicator is adversely changing the first, when, etc., etc. So what we show is that this livestock exposure, so in this part of the region where you have at least 5 to 6 cumulative risks, will be the livestock in this region will be more firstly affected by heat stress intensification, which is the quickest significant change among these 8 different indicators, and then affected by large flood risks in the coming decades. So there are limitations and lots of things to discuss about this work, and I'd be glad to discuss about it, of course. One example is what I told you. We use livestock data, gridded livestock data, but it's fixed settled in time, so we don't take into account how it's going to possibly change during the upcoming decades. And neither we take into account how the pastures and some animals can move to find food in other places, etc., etc. Also, we take into account like we only considered results, numbers when models were agreeing on the sign of the change. We do not quantify really, we do not explore the multimodal uncertainties. And well, we know we have some, and we also focus on one possible future scenario, and we also know that there are others. And this analysis could be extended, so we only focus on West Africa and on livestock, but we can apply this method to other regions. We can apply this method with other type of exposure, so population exposure, ecosystem exposure, etc., etc. So in the same, let's say the same kind of approach, so try to really investigate how this multiple climate risks, or at least climate impacts, could accumulate, emerge in time, evaluate in time, and possibly affect population or living systems. We have also investigated the timing of the multiple climate-related risks, so this time at a global scale. So I'm going to be more specific. This is the second study I wanted to present you today, so we just sent back the review last week, so hopefully it's going to be accepted by the end of the year. But so I'm not going to go back into detail. Global warming observed, intensifying in the future. Once again, pick your favorite IPCC, they've all agreed that. In terms of impacts, sectoral impacts of such warming, many studies are focused on specific sectors. I put you some example of literature if you are interested in it. And at global scale, there have been two kind of, among many, of course, research questions, two research questions have been explored. First, what I kind of illustrated by my previous presentation, how cumulate multisectoral risks, impacts, stressor have already or could accumulate in time and space in the future. So we have published something this year, but it was also already explored at different time scales, different space scales. And another research question that have been largely in more and more explored is timing question of these changes. Something that is largely analyzed in terms of mostly temperature and precipitation, what is called the time of emergence. So you have different approaches to investigate this notion, but one of them is to investigate how, well, global warming itself, so the change in temperature, but also related impacts have already or will emerge from current or from a given reference. For example, you can let's say you fix a reference during the historical period. You can investigate in the future when you have a significant statistical emergence of the change compared to this given reference. And do you have a linear trend? So in that case, you don't have a specific time of emergence, just changing, well, increasing or decreasing. But sometimes you can have like a bump in the change, an abrupt change, and this is what the time of emergence can illustrate. So it has been largely explored in terms of temperature, the first reference I put here, and more recently in 2020 in precipitation in West Africa. I think they investigate the time of emergence for 6 precipitation indicators. And a paper of 2021 recently just started to explore this time of emergence questions for agriculture. So it's for really impact of climate change or climate-related impact. So that's what we wanted to do here. When and how multisectoral climate-related risks and benefits. In the first paper, we focused on adverse change. This time we were like more curious and this time not afraid to try to quantify how climate change could possibly have beneficial or lead to beneficial change. So how these changes could emerge during the coming decades, and this time at global scale. So not the same exactly the same of indicators. We kept precipitation indicator. The heat stress index is now an index to quantify the heat stress over human being, over human population, not the kind of index developed for livestock. Runoff, we kept analyzing it. And this time, which is different, we also investigate the evolution, the projection of the climate and impact simulations of crop yields for 4 major crops: maize, wheat, soy, and rice, and also the burnt area fraction, which is one of the fire indicator, and which is the only fire information that can be provided in future projection in this EasyMIP kind of data. And this time, per indicator, we also consider risks, as I explained before, depending on each indicator change sign, and also benefits. For example, for crop yields, if you have a projection of more crop yields, we consider it as a benefit, or beneficial change. If you have a decline, a crop yield decline, you have a risk, or at least a decreasing benefit. For the time of emergence, many different approaches exist. According to literature, we chose to use statistical tests to explore this question. So what we did was to set a reference distributions on the historical period, so 19, I'm bad with years, so a historical period of reference. And what we did is from 2006, we compared each 27 years distribution with using this statistical test with the reference distribution. So we did that for every 27 values period, 27 years period with this reference, and compared with the statistical test, we calculate what the Euclidean distance. The Euclidean distance and the Kolmogorov-Smirnov test we use tell us that for this number, this type of comparison, so almost 30 values with 30 values, when you have a critical, you have an Euclidean distance higher than certain thresholds, you can consider that your two distributions are statistically and significant. Oh my God. Really different, okay? Yeah. That's complicated. So we consider a time of emergence, so an emergence, when along this comparison of each 27 years values with the reference one, we consider the time of emergence at the first time when this difference is critical, is above the critical distance, with a statistical significance, and also if this emergence, if this statistical difference persists at least over 30 years. So it's not like just a bump in the change, but then it goes back to a linear trend or whatever. So when we detect that, we say we have an emergence, we have a time of emergence, and we do that for each of the indicators. So projected change first in terms of values. So only for a few indicators. Once again, this time we have 10, but don't want to just selected some of that might be interesting. So this is a projected change for a given scenario. I didn't specify, but in the first study, we focus on the most emissive scenario, so the global warming that is projected to intensify the most. This time we went for a low mitigation scenario, so less, let's say, pessimistic, but I'm really using that here, less pessimistic, slightly less pessimistic, which is a RCP 6.0. So instead of projected a mean global warming of +4 degrees as the RCP 8.5, in this scenario, so at the end of the century, the RCP 6.0 projects global warming of almost 2.5. So it's not that bad. Let's say that like that. So future projections of different indicators for wheat yields on the left, soil yields, and not appearing, this is the burnt area fraction at the bottom. So what we can see, well, I'm not going to describe at global scale, but what we can kind of focus on are appears the first side for, especially for crop yields, is that the northern latitude, northern mid-latitudes and northern latitudes, high latitudes, exhibit a projected increase of crop yields, so both for wheat and soy. This is multimodal averages, and you have dots when you have a significance, or you have at least an agreement among the different simulations. And for the tropic, for wheat yields, you have a slight decrease projected. For soy, it's less clear, but it's slightly green, so it tends to show significant, for some places, especially in Brazil, a slight increase in the soy, annual soy yields in these indicators. For some other places, the multimodal show a slight increase, but no, they do not agree on the sign of the change. For burnt area fraction, most of the globe is characterized by an increase. Some places are really significant with high value. For example, Europe and America, Northern America, show values of an increase of at least 80% more of burnt fraction area. In Central Africa, we can see slight decrease of the value, but some of places are not that significant. This is it confirms previous literature about that. There will be less fire in Central Africa because there will be less vegetation to burn. Just to quickly say that. So for the time of emergence, we applied this method. So this was to illustrate the change over 100th century projected according to the model. So we applied this time of emergence for each indicator. Here I am illustrating what we obtained for the burnt areas fraction indicator. If you have, let's say, blue colors, you have time of emergence for beneficial change, so for benefits. If you have, let's say, warm colors, reddish colors, you have an adverse changes projected. So this is the kind of thing we obtain. So when you don't have data, it's whether the model do not agree, whether do not agree on the sign of the change, or if it's the case, we do not detect a time of emergence. So the time of emergence does not come compared to the total trend of the change. So this is what we obtain for different indicators types. So consistently with the projected change sign we showed previously, we have bluish color in mid and northern latitudes, especially for wheat yields. So it means that we have an emergence of beneficial change for this indicator. And when you have darker color, it means that it have already happened if it's before us, or it's at least it takes place before, at the beginning, at early 21st century. So it's the case for Europe, for example, for some part of Northern America. But oppositely, for example, for southeastern of China, there is a beneficial emergence, but according to the simulation, it will take place, it will happen later, so around 2050, 2060, depends. Adverse emergencies for the tropics, for the specific indicators. For soil yields, we have mostly blue colors, so blue emergencies with local and regional difference in terms of whether it's early or later during the 21st century, and of course for burnt areas fraction, but I've already shown you in the bigger this spatial distribution. So still in this approach of accumulation, how this cross-sectoral risk can accumulate mostly in space, we have already seen in time. We did the same kind of matrix that I explained before, but this time we accumulated the emergencies. So if you have a risk emergencies, you have 1. If you don't have, you have 0. We accumulate that for the 10 indicators. So this is accumulated risks emergencies between 2000 and the end of the century. The same for beneficial emergencies. So here at the bottom. Oh, don't do that. So what we can see that in terms of cumulated risk emergencies, the higher values are located all along the tropical areas, the tropical region, with some hotspots, for example, in Brazil or northern India or even lots of places in Africa, you have accumulation of at least 7 to 8 risks for beneficial emergencies. The highest values are located in northern, mid, and high latitudes, mostly in Asia and in Europe. And the values are the maximum possible accumulated benefits emergencies are lower than the maximum accumulated risks emergencies. What is interesting also is that if we do the same, but only considering all the cumulative risk emergencies before 2050, if you compare it with the maps, the corresponding maps on the left, you don't see significant differences. I could have put the map of the difference, to be fair. So this indicates both for risks and also for cumulative benefits that before 2050, most of this accumulation will have already emerged. Messages as well. So under this low mitigation, so it's still in the one of the highest scenario, but it's not the highest emissive scenario in the future. Northern latitudes will mostly experience cumulative positive beneficial emergencies, while the tropics should experience multiple bad or at least adverse emergencies. Most of these emergencies, so time of emergence, will all occur before 2050. And what we also this time explored in the paper, crossing finger, it's at regional scale we really explore the multimodal uncertainty. So how models do agree or do not agree, actually, how models do or do not agree on the sign of emergence, on the possible detection of time of emergence. And what we show is that there is substantial uncertainties, because you have uncertainties in the raw simulations, and you have uncertainties in which indicator you calculate to illustrate the change you want. Then how do you select your method in terms of time of emergence, and etc., etc. So one of the limitations, the indicators, once again, are kind of relative. Like, for example, to illustrate the possible flood risk, we only focus on the highest runoff value of the year, but we do not quantify this is a flood, this is not a flood. We say, if your annual extreme value of runoff is increasing, you have more flood risk, but it's not properly a flood. The same in the other sense for droughts. And we also consider in this type of additions that all of the 10 indicators are independent. And of course, we know that it's not the case. Precipitation, of course, have an impact on runoff. Precipitation and runoff have impacts on crop yields, etc., etc. For all of the indicators, for example, the runoff variables use 4 climate models. And for all of these 4 climate models, you have 6 hydrological models that uses these climate models, climate simulations as inputs. So it means that in total you have 24 simulations. So you can quantify, you have a multimodal representation of the future projections. But in the case of of analyzing only the precipitation or the temperature, you only have these 4 climate models, so which consider it as poorly represented, and we cannot really robustly quantify the uncertainty in that case. And what we can see at the bottom is that my postdoc, I started my postdoc 3 years ago, and we were supposed to do it on the most recent phase of EasyMeet, which is called the EasyMeet 3. But for dark reasons, unknown reasons yet, we're still waiting for this new reason. I'm pretty sure, of course, COVID and stuff have limited the deadlines of such multi-sectoral and really, really, really huge international protocol. But we are currently expecting the EasyMeet 3 that is based on the most recent climate simulation, which is CEMIP 6, so the 6th version of the couple model, the protocol, the couple model international project, doing the same but only for climate. So this works. The 2 studies I explained were based on the CEMIP 5, so the previous version of the protocol, of the project. I'm just going to finish on this slide. The other kind of things I work on, so using this, let's say, expertise on cross-sectoral indicators, we work as a part of an agric exercise to try to attribute maize losses to possible climate events in low input systems in Africa. We have been also contacted with my colleague by an NGO who want to investigate if climate extremes in the region, so focusing on Niger now, how it affects, how it contributes, or it might be just a secondary factor to malnutrition of children in Niger. And also, all of what I just presented, we are trying with a colleague, and Bastien worked with him, his name is Yves Tremblay. We are developing a web platform to freely make available all this data, so all the impact data, post-processed, like on specific region of Africa, South America, and Asia. So if you are interested, you can all check that by yourself, and I'm going to end that if we want to discuss it a bit. Thank you very much for your attention.